Hi guys, this is your video for synthetic division. This is where we're learning about polynomial division, but more specifically, synthetic. Alright, so now we need to figure out when we should use synthetic. So there's two problems here. You can see that they have similar pieces, but they do have differing pieces. When you're looking at a dividing problem, remember your two pieces, you have your dividend. That's what you're dividing, and then you have your divisor. That's what you're dividing by. So you're going to hear me referencing your dividend and your divisor. It's kind of like old news, but I'm still talking about it. So looking at these two problems, the difference between the two problems where it says yes, if you look, this is just a linear term. The power is 1 and it's just 1x. So notice how this, what we're dividing by, so our divisor is just 1x and then either plus something or minus a number. Now the second problem down here, we said no, we cannot use synthetic, and that's because if you look here at your divisor, it's x squared. This is not a linear term. So if you see any exponent other than 1 right here where I'm pointing, then you cannot use synthetic. You must use long division. Okay, so here's your steps for performing synthetic division. On this slide, I suggest you pausing it, writing these down, having these handy, because these will be helpful for when you're working on your problems. So the first thing you're going to do is set up this synthetic division problem. We're going to talk about how to set it up on the next slide. After that, you're going to bring down your leading coefficient to the bottom row. So this will all make more sense when you see the setup, but just so you can hear me explain it through. So you're going to bring down that first value to your bottom row. Then in your third step, you're going to multiply C by that value. And when you do, you're going to write that under your value in your second column. So that's one thing that's not written here. So in step 3, write under the value in the second column. For step 4, you're going to add that new column that you just made. So you add it down, and then you're just going to repeat. So then you're going to multiply by C, and then you write it in the next column. So that's where you're going to keep repeating until you don't have any more columns. And then you write out your answer. So again, pause this screen and you're going to see these steps in action in just a few minutes, but make sure you do have these written down. So let's talk about the setup. So here's an example problem where you have your dividend and you have a divisor, and we want to get these set up appropriately. So when you are working on the setup, you're going to be using 3 lines in your notebook. So the first 2 lines are, you're going to draw kind of like half of a box. Okay, so this is 2 lines in your notebook. Now we're going to add a little bit onto this box. So we're going to make a little box on the outside, and we're going to make a dotted box underneath on the right. Okay, so now let's get these values where they belong. So all of your coefficients from your dividend, so what you're dividing by, that's going to go as the columns on the inside of your big box. So if you look, your coefficients are 2, -3, 4, and -1. So those are my coefficients from my dividend. I just kind of ignore my x's and make sure that they are in order. I start with my x cubed and I go down from x cubed to x squared, linear, no x's. If you are missing a term here, just like with long division, you need a 0 as a placeholder for the column. So that's how you get the inside setup. Now we need to figure out what our C value is that we put on the outside right here. So this is where you look at your divisor. So in our divisor, I'm just going to write it over here so we have it a little bit closer. This is our divisor. Okay, so when we're looking at this, whatever value you see, so if you see an x plus 1, we're going to do a -1 on the inside of that box. If you saw an x minus 7, you'll do a 7 on the inside. So it's the opposite sign. So our opposite sign of what you see. So we saw a +1, so we put in a -1 into our box. So I'm just going to erase that to make it a little bit easier to see, a little bit bigger, and then we'll continue on with the setup here. So on the outside, we had a box, and in that box we now have a -1. It's the opposite sign of what you saw. We saw x plus 1, so we write x minus 1. Now the last thing to talk about is this dotted box that we made. So this box does serve a purpose. At the very end of your whole problem, if you have a value in this box, this is where our remainder will be. So if you have a value remaining, or a value here, it's the remainder. Okay, so I'm just going to put an R in there for now so you know that that's our remainder. So sometimes you'll have a 0, which means that there is not a remainder. Sometimes you do have a value, which means that you do have a remainder. So let's use these steps with a problem here. So we have the problem. We have 3x cubed plus x squared plus x minus 5, and it's all being divided by x plus 2. So when I write this out, when I'm writing out my setup here, you can write it blank, right? We have our box on the outside. That's 2 lines on the inside. And then our remainder box. So let's put our values in there. So starting with our leading coefficients, we have 3, 1, 1, and -5. Those are the coefficients from my dividend. And then if you look at my divisor, it's x plus 2. So I'm going to be putting a -2 on the outside. Okay, so nothing else is going to get filled in yet. Now we actually have to do a little bit of math. So our next step was to bring down the value from our first column. So I'm going to bring down this 3, and now I'm going to multiply it by my -2. So multiply up and I get -6. Add down and I get -5. Multiply up, and remember I'm multiplying by -2. I get 10. Add down, I get 11. Multiply up, so multiplying by -2, I get -22. And when I add down, I get -27. And that's all right because that's my remainder. So remember, the thing you want to remember here is add down, multiply up. Okay, remember you're multiplying by your C value over here. So that's what you're multiplying by. So this is great. This is how you get to your answer, but this is not your answer. So when you do want to write your answer out, like either on an answer line or choosing a multiple choice question, you start with your coefficients. So we have 3. Now our answers are going to have x's in them. So we're going to have x, but we don't know what exponent to start with. So this is where you reference your dividend. So we're coming up here in our dividend, and we started with an x cubed, a 3. So that means our answer, our solution, our quotient here is going to have a 2. So it's going to be 1 less. So we started with a 3. It's going to be 1 less down here. It's going to be a 2. So we're going to have 3x squared. Now we have -5, and you just go down in degrees. So it's going to be 5x to the first plus 11, no x's, and then minus, because we have a -27, so 27 over, now this is the tricky part, the whole dividend, the whole divisor goes underneath, not just -2, so it's going to be x plus 2. So make sure that when you are writing your remainders, it's still over your whole divisor. Okay, so that was our remainder over our divisor. So always make sure it's the whole thing, not just the -2, but x plus 2. So this, my friends, this is your solution. So remember, this only works when you're dividing by a linear term, so like how we're dividing by x plus 2. And we set it up, we follow our process, you see how it kind of like zigzags through, and then you're left with your values. You just have to add your x's in. So let's see a couple more. So here you notice with this one, if I look at my dividend, so what I'm dividing, it does not have a value for every term. Okay, so I'm going to get this set up. I have my box on the front. I have my remainder box at the end. And we need to work on our values here. So we're starting with x to the 4th, and I have 1 x to the 4th. But if you think about this, I have x to the 4th, I have 0x cubed, I have 0x squared, then I do have minus 3x plus 5. So you can really see the places that I'm going to have zeros, the columns here. So I have a 0 for x cubed, a 0 for x squared, a negative 3 for my x term, and then 5 for my constant. So if you forget these zeros, these little guys in here, if you forget them, your problem will be wrong. So make sure that you always have these columns, and this also is true for long division. You always need the columns for missing terms. So now let's figure out what value goes on the outside. So I see an x minus 4. So that means I'm going to have a positive 4. Remember, it's the opposite. All right, so I have a 4 on the inside. We can get going with our process here. So we're just going to bring this first one down and then multiply by 4 up. And you can even write like a little times 4 if that helps you too. So 1 times 4 is 4. Add down. And sometimes I even suggest going like this. Add down. And you get 4. And we're going to multiply by 4 up. And we get 16. Add down. We get 16. We want to multiply by 4 again. Up. And so we get 16 times 4. We get 54. And then we're going to add down. So we have 51. Multiply up, so times 4. So 51 times 4 is 104. And then add down, we get 109. So you can see a little bit of different notation. This one's a little bit, looks messier, but it's a little bit clearer what you're doing. Add down, multiply up. Okay, so when we're writing our answer out, remember these values that we just got in our bottom row, these are our coefficients. These are our values that we're working with. We need to add our x's back in. So again, we're going to start with 1. You don't need to write the 1. We just know it's going to be x to the 3rd because we started with an x to the 4th. So we started with x to the 4th. So 1 less degree. Okay, so you start with 1 less, and then you just go from there. So we have, and now we have 4x squared. We'll have a 16x. We have a 51. And then our remainder is 109. So we have 109 over our whole divisor, which is x minus 4. So you can put a little bubble around it, put a box around it, highlight it, do whatever you need to do. But remember, this, what I just circled, is your answer, not the box with the work. Okay, your answer should look like a polynomial. It should have x's, it should have values. This is what you're looking for. So just to wrap it up, here's some final thoughts. Okay, so remember that the pattern is add down, multiply up. Don't forget that you need 0 coefficients for missing degrees. And then also when writing with your solution, start with 1 degree less than your dividend, so what you were dividing. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to look up the different links and videos that I posted for you guys, and let me know if you have any questions.